Hello, I'm Aaron Bradford. It's nice to be here. Thank you, John, for setting this all up and downloading things off the internet to introduce us with and everything else, too. And thank you for everyone who's here, whether for flex credit or extra credit or just the love of poetry. I read this week there was a thing from McSweeney's, which is kind of like a parody magazine. The only reason that people attend poetry readings are to maybe get a book signed that they can in the future sell on eBay because they want to seem deep or because they need help sleeping. So ideally, if one of those reasons is why you're here, at least you have a good reason for being here. This is National Poetry Month, and I think on some level, every poet I've heard has some kind of deep love affair with language, and so this first poem's kind of about that. A few years ago, it's called We Ya, and a few years ago I'd been doing research on the paranormal, don't ask me why, and I started looking into Ouija boards, you know, the little boards that have kind of yes, no in the alphabet, and you get drunk and light candles and ask for advice from ghosts and things. And I looked at the etymology of it, and I was shocked to find that it was so simple and straightforward. It just is the French word for yes and the German word for yes, we ja. And so I wrote this poem based on that discovery. It's called We Ya. I don't like ghosts or most house guests, but I love questions and how our hands tingle as they close in on the answer that sounds good in every language. Yes, yes, for the love of God, yes. I don't think that poem's actually about the love of language, but we'll pretend it was. This next poem is called Decoration. Maybe it's about the love of language. Let's find out together. My Target cashier knows me better than most of my friends. He sees every part of my life: birthdays, anniversaries, pregnancy tests, diet drinks, chocolate, that camping phase. He even handles most of my wife's underwear before I get the chance. Side note, my wife hates that line, but she recognizes that other people think it's funny. So I get the free pass to keep it in the poem. And that's the benefit of being a poet. You get unconditional love, and then you embarrass people in public. So I won't reread the line. He knows when I'm cheap and petty. A clearance frame for Christmas. Cat food, cat treats, cat toys, and a discount card for Mother's Day. I suppose he even has a pretty good idea what my house looks like. He's seen the plates, bowls, goblets, organizers, martini glasses, detergent, quilts, plastic hampers, fabric softener, lavender, basil, lemon, windy day, lopsided dresser held together with wood glue and dowels, wire curtains, hampers, a beach cruiser, sconces, cutlery, mandolin, candles, Buddha statues, both bodies, and a faux suede chair. If I know Adrian, his watchful eye has noticed everything. How our reds and yellows in the dining room shift to reds and browns in the living room, and that the bedroom is all soft earth tones. Adrian pays attention. And I appreciate that. If I have a full cart and he's doing express, I begin discarding things. A small trail of pajama pants, teak servingware, and a case of Gatorade marking my wake. Of course others glare. But I've begun to need his approval. Last week I asked if the red stripes on a shirt matched my beard. Does it clash, Adrian? He looked at me strangely, but then said, No, it looks good. I stopped sweating immediately. He moved through the rest of the purchase with professional grace. Finally, yesterday, I asked him to stop by after work, and it was just as I imagined it. He knew his way around perfectly, as if he had created a map of every item, knowing its ideal place and played the scene as many times as I, me all smiles and him murmuring the price of everything he passed. $16.59, marked down from $21.99, he said, looking at the wicker magazine rack. Available in black, espresso, and cherry, he whispered to the wine cabinet. Discontinued, he murmured, lips pressed to the dragonfly shower curtain. He slid his middle finger across the edge of the mantel sconce, pressed his palm into the chair's cushion, weighed each river stone in the glass centerpiece, cupping his palm into a scale and testing the sturdiness of the bedside bench with the tips of his fingers, firm yet gentle, with the same touch he used when gliding a leopard print scarf across the scanner. And right before he left, as he set the highball with the retro bubbles and swirls onto the cork coaster, he said what I had been waiting for since I put my first purchase on his conveyor belt, what we all perhaps hope to hear after every purchase. I love it. I just love what you've done. Thank you. This next poem, I want to give a little background. It's a fairly recent poem, but I had found out about this event, and I describe how I found out. I found out about an event called the Great Boston Molasses Flood. Has anybody heard about the Great Boston Molasses Flood? One person has. When I first heard about it, it sounded hilarious because it's like, oh, a flood of molasses. How could anybody not outrun it? Ha ha ha. It sounds like a Donald Duck cartoon or something like that. And I wanted to write a poem about it. And the first time I wrote it, it was kind of like this funny poem. And then I did more research on it, and it turned out that a bunch of people died in this disaster, and it was a horrendous disaster, and several children were the people who died. And then this poem turned out to be a terrible poem because you can't write something funny about it. So I tried again, but then I wrote a very judgmental poem and a very self-righteous poem, and that poem was terrible too, because being judgmental and self-righteous is terrible. And so I revised and revised this poem so many times just to get the tone right. And I think I found a way to do so. In the middle of the poem, I'll change the way I speak just slightly, because in the middle of the poem is the actual words from the cooking show, where I first heard about this. So it kind of, you'll recognize it, and it comes back a couple times. And so if you're a writer, as many of us are, this was an exercise for me to get the right tone so that I could balance out some things. And it's called The Great Boston Molasses Flood. My daughter can't sleep, so I watch subtitled TV and rock. Olympic curling ends, but she's still awake. I find a cooking show on molasses and learn how cane boils and spins to give crystals until only black strap is left, the slow process of separating stalks into money. My daughter finally closes her eyes as we return from commercial. I begin to drift. Oh, that was a Freudian slip right there. That was a Freudian slip. Let me rewind that. Who knows what's in there? I begin to drift, and animation flickers a speed limit for molasses. I blink back, and the host is describing 12,000 tons of blackstrap exploding in overheated still. I rewind the DVR, pause the text. The tank exploded, releasing a 15-foot-tall tidal wave of sticky goo, which raced across the north end of the city at about 35 miles per hour, okay? Now, 21 people died and another 100 were hurt. We're not going to let that happen to us. The event becomes a lesson in kitchen safety. The dark-haired girl on my shoulder gurgles, and I pad to her room, to her crib, to transfer. Following latest guidelines, I lay her back to sleep. No blankets, listless now, I wiki to know more. Boston, Purity Distilling, 21 dead, Southern Italians and Irish, workers and children. Last one's in, first one's out. Salt water cleanup. Maria D'Estasio, 10 years old. I imagine dark hair sticky with blood and sugar and close my laptop. I walk to the pantry and find the small-lipped bottle, green label. Brer Rabbit watches me with one eye. I put it back, hidden behind oils and alcohol. I watch to mark imperceptible stirring. Cornstarch, dried peppers, pancake mix, chips, sea salt, sandwich bags. The monitor whimpers. Is everything a safety lesson? We're not going to let this happen to us. But so much can cover us. So much can take us back to sleep. Going from that, I'm going to read a poem entitled Swings. It was the first poem I ever wrote about my oldest daughter now. It was back when I only had one daughter. And I remember the first time I read it in public, Tracy said, "Aaron, you should write more poems like that." And so I said, "Hey, I'll write more poems like that. If Tracy says to do it, I'll definitely do that." So this one's called Swings. My morning is spent. My daughter has swung as high as my arms could get her, each push directed. You're flying over the tupelo and the pine trees. You're over the maple. You're flying over ponies. You're over shapes, over squares. You're over falcons, over clouds. She shut eyes and said, "Louder." The pigtails my wife made had slid undone, and louder now. You're flying over oceans, over the moon. You're flying over stars. You're flying over the edge of the galaxy and its milky line. You're flying over a black hole. And I grabbed her foot to make her laugh. "No, louder," she yelled. And the day sprawled around us before arcing into elliptical orbit, bringing us closer and pushing us apart. Thank you. This next poem. Last June, I decided to give myself a task, a writing task. I decided to try to write a poem every day, with the key word being try, because that was my way out. It was like, oh, if I don't, I just said try. So I tried to do that, and this is one of several that I'll read today where I tend to go toward perfection. I go, okay, if it's not perfect, then I'm just not even going to try. So I gave myself the leeway just to write things that were not perfect that I could just then go back and revise later, and just spend June writing, July, and the rest of the year kind of revising, just to have some things going. A couple of years ago, my wife gave me a telescope, a very nice telescope, and I have tried to use it since and been fairly bad at it. Sometimes I can't even find the moon with my telescope, which is an embarrassing thing to happen because the moon is very large, and you should be able to find the moon with a telescope. So this is a poem about me not being very good at finding stuff with my telescope. And it's called Declination. And declination, if you're familiar with telescopes, you need it to be able to, you need to measure declination to find things. I fumble in the dark to find my latitude so I can find Mars. I marked the wrong dial before the sunset and can't track my telescope. I imagined by this time I would be drunk, Mars would display ridges, and my wife would be enthralled. Instead, she's inside, and the gnats are biting my feet. My phone's light reveals I'm still at 38 degrees with meaningless feet and inches following. Intuitive design has ruined me for subtle work. One of the 3 dials needs setting, but I was distracted during the demo video, and now I can see Mars with my eyes, but can't find it with refraction. So I readjust, and I find something that resembles a star, about the size of my visible Mars, and call my wife out. She's right, though. Telescopes should make things bigger. So I unlick pivots, freeing declination and ascension, sway the tube, and stars stream. That's something, right? She agrees it looks like an astronaut's view and goes back inside. So I spin aimlessly, hoping to chance on Mars, while gnats light on my legs, pull blood and flit. Tomorrow, again, I'll read the manual, scratch mounds barely visible, little red planets, and hope to see more. This next poem, it's called Pining. When I moved into our house, we had these 2 beautiful, beautiful pine trees, and it turned out that they should not have ever been planted there because it was the absolute wrong climate for this specific type of pine tree, and so they were riddled with pests and some sort of other blight that was going to kill them off in a very short time period. So this is called Pining. The Aleppo pines in the backyard will die in 15 years, said the smut arborist. Canker or blight, I don't remember the diagnosis she gave before leaving. But the details stuck. Sap will exude, flesh will wax, and needles will cover the yard. I flake bark trying to train my eyes to what the arborist saw, while my daughter turns basil, hawthorn berries, and dandelions into muddy soup. She's making medicine for her trees. I twitter between the two pines to trim them, but find mounds of rusted sap that speckle trunks. I scalpel one, and a white caterpillar blooms in a soft crater in the wax, a rim of blood around its mouth. My fingers burst it, and I wipe them on the grass and scrape another. A caterpillar dangles in its slivered bore. My daughter runs to the tree, tingling. Can I keep it? I think it's killing the tree. Kill it. I crush the red mouth with the shears and scrape another mound and then another. White worms pulsing in each. My daughter asks me for a turn. Thin limbs bend with imago cones, roots spindle in clay, and her small fingers turn flesh into translucence. This next poem, it does not take place in my backyard, as the last three poems took place in. This poem, it references semiotics, which is everybody's favorite topic right before spring break. Semiotics is just the study of signs, and it oftentimes will focus on how language is almost an arbitrary system to designate the objects we see and turn them into abstract concepts. And so this just kind of plays with that idea a little bit. And it's called Polar Bear White. My daughter, at 2, sees in semiotics. Colors are concepts, arbitrary, so she uses objects instead. This insight applies only to one color, to be honest, and one substance, white polar bears. So the stars on her pajamas are polar bear stars, and the cow's milk she drinks is polar bear milk. I wear polar bear undershirts, and polar bear cars dot parking lots and suburban driveways. Each substitution seems a surprise to her, or the surprise is a world that surrounds her with the creatures she loves. She will learn later of our best efforts to melt ice caps, and even later, she'll learn we kept polar bear privilege. She'll experience polar bear guilt over this. But by then, 16 or so, she'll begin to pretend surprises have ended. So she'll look at stars, and too worried to suspect only light exists, and we're all casting shadows, say in a green-edged yellow, white. That poem is indebted to Wallace Stevens' Disillusionment of 10 O'Clock. And if you know that poem, then you know that. And if you don't know that poem, it's okay if you don't know that. It doesn't do anything for it. This poem kind of starts with an illusion. I just have a few more here. So that we can have some Q&A too. It starts with an allusion to John Donne's excellent poem, Valediction Forbidding Mourning. That he wrote when he and his wife had to separate and go on a trip. He had to go on a trip, and so this was one of those poems I wrote last June when I went on a trip to an AP reading in Kansas City, and it's called "I've Never Been Good at Forbidding Mourning," because I'm not. He was very excellent at it. I'm terrible at forbidding mourning. This is perhaps the most neurotic poem I've ever written, so I'm just going to share it with you, just for the experiencing of sharing it too. I have faith the super shuttle driver won't return to rape and kill my family. Faith he won't pull into an alley to kill me. Faith he will take me to the airport and not a trafficking ring full of cliches. Faith the woman I hand my bag with most of my clothing in won't empty it into the trash. Faith the conveyor belt leads to a man in an orange vest who won't empty most of my clothes into a dumpster. That my bag will make it to a city I've never been to before. Faith that Kansas City exists. Faith, the plane won't disappear. Faith, no one will cut my throat or threaten to cut someone far more important's throat. Faith, engine fuel exists, not in the abstract, but in the tank of this specific plane. Faith, my bag, I don't care about anybody else's, will be transferred to my connecting flight, and most of my clothes will follow me to the Midwest. Faith, the Midwest exists. Faith, my name is on a list compiled by a stranger of strangers' names for shuttle rides to a hotel. I have faith exists. Faith, my roommate won't rape or kill me in my sleep. Faith, it's such a strange. Faith, I can do this in reverse when I return home. I have faith my house and cars won't burn while I'm gone. Faith, emergency rooms won't claim my daughters. And faith, you, my love, will stay alive, so I can love you, my compass point, love you. I had a poetry teacher who used to give the audience a 2-poem warning, kind of like, okay, we're down to the final 2, you can start paying attention again. So this is my 2-poem warning. There's only 2 more. And then we'll hopefully have some time for some Q&A too. This poem has an epigram. And it was something that kind of like was tossed around Facebook last year and the year before. The epigram comes from a Canadian newspaper called the Globe and Mail, because it's reporting on a study done in Canada. And this epigram just reads, "Fathers who split dishes, dusting, and laundry with mothers raise daughters who aspire to high-paying careers," says the author of a new gender roles study from the University of British Columbia. So I wrote this in kind of reply to that, and it's called Sponge. Since there's no inheritance, I wash dishes. Since we budget for overdraft fees, I vacuum. I make lunches since I haven't made college funds. I spray, wipe, and check the counter for water spots since I don't understand compounding interest. Because of student loans to get a degree in poetry, I dust. Because this poem is a splinter, not the rings or the roots of the tree. Because memory pressures each moment, crystallizing time. Because money scares me, I push you to play so I can soak pans as I watch your growing hands dig and lengthening legs run, so a sponge can catch something stubborn, something to flake off, so correlations can stick, so you can make more. This last poem is a haiku. I thought I'd end the reading with a haiku. Why not? It's actually two syllables shorter than a haiku, so it's better. But it has an epigram, so it cheated. So it has an epigram from Basho, who's a haiku master. And the epigram references adjectives of scale, which are just things like bigger and happiest, and those things that basically compare things to one another. So the epigram is just, from Basho, if you avoid adjectives of scale, you'll love. And the poem's called Vows. To be safe, avoid richer, poorer, better, worse, and just kiss. Thank you.